JST123 has progressed my thinking towards a relationship between Indigenous Australians and the criminal justice system, developing a greater understanding of Australian history with Aboriginal diversity, Aboriginal intergenerational trauma, incarceration and access to justice. This will help inform my future career as a police officer. Executive Chief Michael Tabull argued that Indigenous Australians continue to get discriminated upon, have unequal access to justice, and are the highest represented individuals in Australian jails. JST123 has illustrated how the government and New South Wales Police Force have implemented strategies to close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. I agree with methodologies like Close the Gap as it approaches Aboriginal social determinants of health, allowing Indigenous Australians greater access to healthcare, quality of housing and welfare. However, my teacher, Mr. Puru, had stated that the government, in response to Indigenous Australians being familiar with the criminal justice system, it isn't always effective. This is because not all Indigenous Australians are aware of their rights to access to justice systems like legal aid. I was surprised that the incarceration rates of Indigenous Australians have increased by 40% within the past decade, even though the government has initiated factors with a new justice system for Indigenous Australians by introducing government agencies covering the criminal justice system, preventing inequality in courts, policing and jails. I'm wondering if this would be effective. Studies by the New South Wales Police Force have shown that to reduce incarceration rates, the engagement between New South Wales Police Force and Aboriginal people needs to be developed. Therefore, New South Wales Police Force have initiated the Aboriginal Strategic Direction Plan to improve the trust between Aboriginals and the New South Wales Police Force to reduce incarceration rates by creating supportive programs. The government has implemented federal legislation on discrimination, ensuring that everyone has the rights to freedom, to be free from discrimination, and has the right to self-determination. I agree with my teacher, Mr. Rodell, as he discusses cultural competency as a crucial and fundamental requirement to work sufficiently and effectively with diverse cultures and how Indigenous Australians' paradigms of incarceration continues. Therefore, I believe that new police recruiters need to attend mandatory training that informs them on cultural competency, ensuring they understand how to approach diverse communities. The prejudice against Indigenous Australians by the police force during the stolen generation still has a major impact to incarceration rates. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare stated that Aboriginals part of the stolen generation are 2 times more likely to be incarcerated and over 50% were charged by police in their lifetime. Therefore, support programs need to be developed within society that will reduce incarceration rates and prevent intergenerational trauma. My professional practice as a police officer to familiarise myself and others how to communicate with diverse communities. Policing needs to ensure that they create compulsory training regarding cultural competency. My professional practice needs to introduce programs to rehabilitate Indigenous Australians, and the modules in my course have taught myself and my future policing career how to approach individuals from diverse backgrounds such as the Indigenous Australian communities, and how to appropriately interact with Indigenous Australians without being biased or discriminatory to enhance the trust between Indigenous Australians and New South Wales Police Force. As a police officer, to reduce incarceration rates, improve the engagement between Indigenous communities and New South Wales Police Force, and Aboriginal self-determination, we need to reject neocolonialism and prevent cultural imperialism. As a police officer, my sole purpose is to protect and provide safety for the community. The knowledge I've learnt from JST123 has ensured that I need to know statistical, quantitative and qualitative data to provide information to Indigenous communities. My knowledge on Indigenous Australians' history and the impact of incarceration, colonisation, and neocolonialism is frustrating. Indigenous Australians still to this day deal with discrimination and inequality. In regard to this, wanting to become a police officer has made me motivated, wanting to make a difference in society. JST123 has progressed my thinking, wanting to introduce new policies that focus on rehabilitation for Indigenous communities, that creates support, prevents crime and reduces incarceration. Forming mainstream approaches that also focus on therapeutic approaches for those dealing with intergenerational trauma and changing programs to create initiatives to stop paradigms.